perception of continuous speech. Words are perfectly intelligible in the context of fluent speech. Without being able to comprehend continuous speech, we would be unable to understand what others are expressing, and we feel that we are being isolated. Now, sounds are closely embedded in the context of fluent speech. Lots of research has been done, and especially Pollack and Pickett's in 1964, they conducted a study that where a conversation of women were recorded when they were waiting in a room for some psychology experiment, and that room was a soundproof room. So later on, the words were spliced out from those tape-recorded conversation, and when they were given to those words, when they were given to a separate group of subjects, it was seen that although the words are perfectly intelligible in the continuous speech process, but when they are presented in isolation, one half of them were incorrectly identified. So this leads us to the assumption that acoustic information is not sufficient, and there are other factors that also play an important part in the understanding of any spoken word. Our perception of continuous speech is different from our perception of individual words. So when we look at the speech, and when the process is continuous, the kind of impression or meaning that one forms is very different when you look at word in isolation. Sometimes the meaning is lost. The kind of meaning that you draw from a continuous speech process is lost when you look at the words in isolation or independently of the context in which they are being spoken. The other factors that play important role in the perception of continuous speech are the ones where you see the role of prosodic factors and then semantic and syntactic factors. Now, under the role of prosodic factors, you will see that we will have the prosodic factors which provide a source of stability in perception. Now, what do we mean by that? Prosodic factors are, as we are aware of the fact, they are stress, intonation, and rate, and they provide a source of stability in perception because we can often hear these superimposed qualities at a distance that would simply tax our ability to identify individual speech segments. Now, for instance, we can detect the moods of person talking down the hall from the intonational contours of their speech, but still not be able to identify what they are saying. So we can only pay attention to the tone or the intonation that can be assessed from what he or she is speaking, but we cannot identify what actually they are talking. Similarly, other prosodic factors such as speech rate or tempo are relatively easy to detect. We perceive stress by a combination of acoustic cues along with our knowledge of the stress rules of the language, and that is what Lieberman believes. That we distinguish between two meanings of blackbird, for example, by detecting the relative loudness of the first and second syllables. We distinguish between the two meanings of blackbird, for example, by detecting the relative loudness of the first and second syllables. So, distinguishing two meanings in terms of the stress or in terms of detecting the loudness of the first syllable and the second syllable. This is also a key component of prosodic factors, and that comes under stress. Speakers modify their rate of production by number of and sometimes number and length of pauses during sentences or utterances, as well as by the amount of time spent articulating those utterances. Now, coming to the semantic and syntactic factors, we see that context and speech recognition, phonemic restoration, and mispronunciation detection, all these come under the semantic and syntactic factors. Context and speech recognition, phonemic restoration, and mispronunciation detection. So under context and speech, a word isolated from its context becomes less intelligible. So that is the hypothesis that has been proved by Pollack and Pickus with the help of the experiment that I just explained. Now it follows that if we vary semantic and syntactic aspects of this context, then we should find changes in the perceptibility of the speech passage. Now this perceptibility of the speech passage comes from the varying of semantic and syntactic aspect. Phonemic restoration is a perceptual phenomenon where under certain conditions, sounds actually missing from a speech signal can be restored by the brain and may appear to be heard. For example, if you look, eel was on the aisle and it was found that the heel was on. So you know that where this word and is, for example, that heel was on the shoe. So if you look at WEL and look at the context, you can come up with the word yourself. And the phonemic restoration actually is the process of restoring the sounds that actually come from specific words. Now, mispronunciation detection has been suggested that students can be required to pre-register, which means that the context that helps determine how the phonemic restoration takes place, and the students needs to come up with this mispronunciation detection by, for example, suggested, and since it is been mispronounced, the students can understand the spellings by having the previous knowledge of a word. Overall, contextual information powerfully influences the perception of individual speech segments, and our perception of speech segments in continuous speech appears to be an interaction of various levels of analysis that proceeds simultaneously in the course of language processing.